By 120 million years ago, the great continent of Gondwana was coming apart. By 100 million years ago, the Indian plate had broken off and was set on its way up north. The Indian plate, including India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, and Sri Lanka, promptly raced across the ocean at the rapid clip of 8 inches yearly before starting to crash into the Eurasian plate by 50 million years ago. As it subducted, and indeed continues to nestle underneath the Eurasian plate, it's lifting said plate, giving constant rise to the Himalayan mountains. Moving ahead many millions of years and to the west of the Indian plate, an animal that would soon migrate over to India had appeared on the scene by 315,000 years ago. Homo sapiens didn't show up more commonly in the fossil record until shortly before 200,000 years ago, and aside for one alleged Greek one from 210,000 years ago, the following sapien fossils are from Africa. From this within Africa position of sapiens, the story of global expansion only really changes around 70,000 years ago, as more sapiens leave Africa and humans begin to colonize this globe, and hopefully soon, others. By 60,000 years ago, humans are in India living hunter-gatherer lifeways. And we move ahead once again, this time 53,000 years to 7,000 years ago, and now some humans in the northwest of India are doing agriculture. A combination of the power of agriculture along with increased aridity sending people away from the increasingly desiccated lands towards the land with rivers and rain, saw a threefold increase in population from 3000 to 2600 BC in the agricultural villages and towns of this region. By 2600 BC and 2500 BC respectively, we have the remains of two cities, each likely counting a population of 30,000 or even higher, Harappa and Mohenjodaro. These cities are the two largest cities, but they're not the only ones. And the civilization itself, identified by their similarity of cultural artifacts, weights, and building techniques, spanned many more towns and villages and rural areas. Of all the concurrently existing urban civilizations, the Mesopotamians, the Egyptians, and the soon-to-be but far smaller Minoan civilization, none held a candle to the expanse this one did. The other two large-sized civilizations for the time, the two first civilizations to arise in history, Mesopotamia and Egypt, combined to cover less land than this Indus civilization. And that makes it all the more tragic that we know far less about them than the others. Perhaps the greatest contribution to our ignorance is that, unlike concurrent Egypt and Mesopotamia, the language of the Indus people isn't understood. It's not even entirely certain that what we're looking at is a written language here. They clearly have symbols that appear somewhat like the other early writing systems, but they appear in very small bursts. Even the largest one yet found tops out at a mere 34 characters. So whatever is being conveyed, these are not the conventional hymns, royal decrees, religious texts, and other prolonged messaging that we find for other civilizations that helps us gain insight into their ways. So what did these people believe? We can, and do, conjecture based off the limited imagery we have from them, but that's, for the time being, rather wide open to interpretation with little evidence to go off of in general, and no hard evidence in favor of the more extreme interpretations of the most famous artifact of this civilization, the so-called priest king. A priest king, a religious figure as an early leader, is not an unheard of model, and is a commonly held presumption about early Mesopotamian leadership. But the thing is, when it comes to who ruled this Indus civilization, or even how it was ruled, whether it was a combined civilization under unified control or divided in a particular way or whatever, we don't know. In the other early civilizations, we find authority testified to in the form of grand temples and palaces, in the most highly touted cities manifesting the central authority of the god or goddess and his or her representatives, along with the relatively secular authority vested in the ruler. But here in the cities, there might be temples, but small ones. There might be meeting halls, but to what end they were used and who might have been meeting in them, we don't know. We don't have any grand scenes adorning the walls, and in fact we don't have any monumental architecture glorifying rulers or even the kinds of tombs we associate with the elites from elsewhere. There appear to be storehouses in the cities, thought to be for grain and demonstrating what thankfully could still be presumed about a city, that it exists in some sort of symbiotic, though not necessarily particularly consensual, relationship with the agricultural lands around it. And it's those people, the ones who provided many of the calories sustaining the civilization, that we know virtually nothing about. It's estimated that somewhere between 1 and 5 million people lived across the expanse of this civilization. Most of them, as is the norm for agrarian civilizations, not living in the cities. Whatever the living situation for those outside the cities, those inside the cities lived in homes ranging from a single room to 3-story homes with over 10 rooms. But once again, while disparities clearly exist, the disparities are nothing like what we see in the other concurrent civilizations. How this grew and was maintained, with no clear evidence of the nature of rulership, if there was that, and no evidence of battles or wars, is one of the largest mysteries facing us about our early human civilizations. However, the lack of evidence of battles isn't read by everyone as proof of peacefulness, and it's been suggested that they may well have seen great violence now lost to us. But to many, the lack of evidence speaks volumes. While there are weapons found, such as bows and arrows and slings, as well as copper spears, daggers, short swords, and axes, the more typical weapons of war do not appear. Where are the chariots, helmets, shields, full-size swords, maces, and battle axes? Where are the signs of battle or of an army? Why don't they show any soldier or warfare in their art? It seems possible that it was something other than force holding the civilization together, possibly a unity of cultural presumption arising from something we're blind to. Their cities were planned with a straight main street, unlike the typical windy nature of city streets that arise more of their own accord. Mohenjodaro and Harappa are walled, though it's generally not considered primarily for defensive purposes, and was perhaps used for preventing smuggling/regulating trade. The walls and homes are built with baked bricks. They didn't use stone for building. Many of the bricks were recycled after the fall of these cities, and it was the exacerbation of this recycling process in the late 19th century as the British had a railroad built and the workers were using many bricks as ballast for the track that had the British government stop this and thankfully salvage for the time being a compelling component of our human heritage. Of the heritage uncovered are many more artistic artifacts. There are over 3,500 steatite seals showing different animals and sometimes semi-human or human figures. There's also pottery and figurines. One of these figurines is the so-called dancing girl of Mohenjodaro. She has bangles on both her arms, has her hair styled in a bun, and stands poised in a confident posture. Of course, the interpretation of this figure as a dancer is just one of a number. Another contention is that she is delivering a sacrifice to a god. Similar figurines, though of clearly lesser quality, have been interpreted as that, and there does appear to be something in the dancing girl's left hand. Whatever her story, if you remember anything from this video, it's the two figures of the probably not priest king and the maybe dancing girl, as those are the two most known artifacts of this culture, though they are of course not emblematic of the artifacts, even the more limited figurines thus far found. The other most notable aspect of this civilization is their sanitation and cleanliness. Homes had bathrooms, and Mohenjodaro had a large bathhouse. There was a sewage system for waste to go from under the bathroom and eventually reach a soak pit. This aspect of their civilization, their level of concern and in fact ability to protect their hygiene, is beyond any other concurrent and indeed many later civilizations as well, and leads some to think that they were religiously concerned with cleanliness. Whatever the story of the Indus civilization, it came to an end, at least in the sense of their cities and their cultural uniformity declining and dissipating. By 1900, decline had begun, and by 1700, most cities, including the weakened Mohenjodaro, were abandoned. 200 years later, no Indus city remained. The extent of their dispersal and their influence on the coming cultures of India is ambiguous and disputed, and I'm going to ignore that subject here. With the decline of the Indus civilization, migrants who trundled in, and they may now have done so in far greater number, would leave a greater impact on the coming cultures. And it's the Indo-Aryans who were making their way into India as the last gasps of the Indus civilization whimpered into non-being.